I very much prefer it for my own health, but also for the health of my clients to make vitamin D via the skin, as opposed to thinking that we can take a supplement of D3 and it does the exact same thing. That is not the same as making vitamin D from sunlight. And but making vitamin D from sunlight actually has so many other forms or versions. It's called metabolites of vitamin D that are biologically important for our health and our physiology. I've had people come to me who had been on long-term vitamin D supplementation and high doses of vitamin D supplementation. And at first they may have said that they noticed a benefit to it. Maybe it had somewhat of an anti-inflammatory effect. Oftentimes these are high doses are even being prescribed by physicians these days for things like autoimmune conditions. And I've had several clients with either autoimmune conditions or thyroid conditions who have said that they were told to be on high doses of vitamin D, and initially symptoms were improved. But in the long term, ultimately, symptoms came back, and then oftentimes it even got worse while being on this sustained high dose of vitamin D3 supplementation. And so this led me to kind of go down a couple of rabbit holes here and investigate what's taking place. And what I believe is taking place is that vitamin D3 in that form is a secosteroid hormone. It's a steroid hormone, right? So what do we give someone when they have inflammation? Like what you could literally go to a doctor, and if you had an inflammatory cascade going on in your body, you could be given a steroid hormone, prednisone, for example, right? Because it does help to lower the inflammatory cascade. It absolutely can be a potent anti-inflammatory. However, long-term usage of that can actually dysregulate other pathways in the body. And so that's why I think clients initially may have felt a benefit to D3 supplementation, but then over the long term, it actually I believe it dysregulated what was happening at the level of the vitamin D receptor itself, and the level of gene transcription, right? And so that's a whole thing that we can talk about. Maybe you practitioners out there listening to this would be interested in that. But what does this mean for us? And what does this mean for my clients? Well, when we make vitamin D3 through the skin, we actually optimize the amount that we have. We are able to sulfate it for free transport through the blood. It doesn't rely on the vitamin D binding protein and other carriers to take it through the blood. And at the same time, it makes dozens of metabolites. So I just wanted to show an image. Let me see. I think I have, yeah, okay. I've pulled up a slide here that has an image that I found in a research article that was studying lumisterol. That's one of the versions of vitamin D that gets made through sunlight. And so here's what I want you to see, right? When we have UVB light exposure striking the skin, we convert this 7-DHC, that's a version of cholesterol, into we can convert it into so many different aspects of vitamin D, right? All of these things that you see that start with 20 or 22 or 24 or 120, all of these are versions of vitamin D. They're called metabolites. Ones that you might see that you recognize would be D3, right? Vitamin D3. But then we also have pre-D3, and we can interconvert these pathways. So a lot of these pathways aren't just going in one direction. They can interconvert based on what pathways need to be optimized. For a long time, they called these different metabolites inactive metabolites. Makes no sense that the body would have so many inactive metabolites and that you can interconvert back and forth. So one of the metabolites that we make is a version of from vitamin D is called lumisterol. That lumisterol has been studied to interact with something called the liver X receptor. And it has ramifications in optimizing the amount of cholesterol, or like cholesterol metabolism, triglyceride metabolism, inflammatory cascades that are happening in the arteries. And so we need that lumisterol to be produced in the body in order to be able to have those beautiful cholesterol, triglyceride, and inflammatory regulating effects. When we just take a vitamin D3 supplement, we do not get that same effect. And in fact, I've seen people who high dose vitamin D3 to the extent that it's very, very elevated in their blood pathways. And remember, when there's a whole nother story that I'm also going to talk about of testing vitamin D3 from the blood. But that being said, when they've taken high doses of vitamin D3, I've seen significantly elevated LDL cholesterol. And not that I think cholesterol is bad, right? I have a whole take on cholesterol. But that being said, when we see highly elevated LDL, why would that be? Well, in order for this D3, these high amounts of D3 to be transported through the bloodstream, they have to get transported in a lipid carrier. That's what LDL is. It carries these things through the bloodstream. And so that's why I've seen highly elevated LDL cholesterol numbers in people when they've been on high dose vitamin D3 supplementation. And unfortunately, this one individual who I'm thinking about, her physician wanted to prescribe her statins in order to lower the LDL, not recognizing that it was due to the high D3 supplementation in the first place. And so I'll stop the share here, but I hope you realize here why we need to understand that just looking at one version of vitamin D is antiquated. Now, what about vitamin D testing? Well, unfortunately, that's antiquated too. The typical test only tests an inactive version of vitamin D3 called 25-OHD. And there's a more active version called 125-OHD. But as you just saw in that previous slide, there's literally dozens of metabolites that never get tested. So the only thing that typically gets tested is the amount of that inactive vitamin D that's being transported through the blood at the time of that test. We don't keep that version of D3 in the blood. We're designed to actually put it in the liver and put it in subcellular stores. We can store it inside of our cells. And we also have all of these dozens of metabolites that are not getting tested either. So when we get a vitamin D test done, we're testing a small subset of one type of vitamin D. And yes, there is a correlation between low vitamin D levels in the winter and potentially increased risks of infectious disease, autoimmune conditions. But what a lot of people don't realize is that vitamin D actually is only one. Vitamin D works in the summer in the same way that melatonin works in the winter. Both of them can bind to something called the vitamin D receptor, meaning that if in the summertime, I'm designed to make through my skin a lot of vitamin D that can bind to the vitamin D receptor and exert all of its effects from being anti-inflammatory, immunosupportive, optimizing, being anti-cancer, right? There's a lot of pathways that get optimized through that vitamin D receptor. Interestingly, very recently, it was discovered that melatonin also binds to the vitamin D receptor to exert all of those same important effects in the body in terms of promoting our health. It never made sense why I would need to supplement massive amounts of D3 in the wintertime when I wouldn't have had a natural source of it, right? Where I live, there is no UVB light, so I can't make it through my skin. And yes, maybe I could have caught some fish or eaten some liver here and there, but why would I have had to consume a massive amount of it in supplemental form to keep it elevated in my bloodstream for health? Turns out that in the winter, I need to optimize darkness. If I optimize darkness in the winter, that allows me then to use melatonin to bind to the vitamin D receptor to exert its beneficial effects. And I'm going to guarantee you very few people have optimized melatonin levels unless they're blocking artificial light at night. Hence why, yes, we're testing low D, but is it low D or is it low melatonin or poor melatonin signaling in the winter? I find that if clients optimize D through the skin in the summer and optimize melatonin all year long, but especially in periods of greater darkness, such as winter, then we have healthy bodies all year long without the need to supplement that D3. And so this is a really cool, but slightly complex story, but a really cool one at the same time, because it allows us to look through the lens of nature to understand what we need to optimize and how we need to do it. So I hope you can recognize we're not just using D3, right? We're using dozens of metabolites in our body to optimize our health, and we're designed to make it through the skin. And at the same time, in the winter, it's not about the D3 per se. Yes, we want to make sure we might be consuming small amounts of vitamin D3 rich foods, but at the same time, melatonin is key in the winter to optimize. So it can bind to that same receptor and exert all of the beneficial effects.